Good morning to all. Hello, my name is, we'll start with the symposium now, right? Yeah, hi. Uh, okay, great. Hello. So my name is Tushar Rajkumar with all public events here at C are open to all and is streamed online on our YouTube channel for our online audience. This symposium is an initiative to address and voice out the contemporary discourses in architecture education. The design studio has often been framed to contextualize certain conditions of the real world, through which design has been a response that emerged through the studio processes. In a way, it has begun to stimulation or a simulation of the modern practice, leading to the production of architects narrowly oriented towards the act of building making. However, the contemporary thinking of space needs far more complexity in terms of ethnographic inquiry, the digital space, speculation of other worlds, scales of objects, experience, and questions of sustainability, environment, the political space, amongst others. This shifts necessitates a fundamental rethinking of how architecture is taught and point towards the urgent need for pedagogical transformation in India. This teacher symposium is a platform that brings together participators, practitioners of architecture pedagogy to examine and discuss the mechanism that produce architecture education, which otherwise, as we all know, has been discussed only through its final outcomes, portfolios, projects, exhibitions, the graduates. It is an attempt to shift attention to the internal structure of the pedagogy itself, asking how studios and courses are conceived, framed, and mobilized as intellectual and disciplinary instruments. This symposium title, Anatomy of the Design Brief, foregrounds the design brief as a critical pedagogical device, one that mediates between the program, research, and speculation, context, and abstraction. It examines how contemporary briefs are shaped and how new contexts demand new ways of defining relevance, responsibilities, accountability, and agency in architecture. Today, we have invited 5 educators working across different studios and courses, each of whom positions pedagogy as a site of experimentation, critique, and disciplinary renewal. Through their work, we hope to explore how teaching practices are redefining academic practice in India today and how the design brief itself becomes a space where architecture values are articulated, tested, and contested. Our first speaker, Aishwarya Padmanabhan, is an assistant professor in KRVIA, Mumbai. She holds a bachelor's of architecture from KRVIA, a master's in architecture history and theory from CEPT University, and a postgraduate diploma in visual studies. Her academic interests includes research, visual aesthetics, criticism, and writing through interdisciplinary lens such as gender studies, feminist theory, phenomenology, tectonics, and material culture. Her long-standing argument, her long-standing engagement with Bharatanatyam led her to pursue her master's dissertation titled Rasa through the haptic co-making performance space in Tanjavur during the reign of Sarfoja 2. Sarfoji, I hope I'm saying that right. Yeah. Sarfoji, yeah, thanks. Aishwarya is currently a PhD candidate at the NMMIS School of Architecture. Her doctoral research continues to investigate the fragmented architectural history of the Tanjavur Marathas, particularly in light of larger as well as regional nationalist narratives that have contributed to its erasure. Our second speaker, Shikha Parmar, is an architect and educator reimagining practice and pedagogy at the intersection of speculative design, emerging technologies, and critical inquiry. She believes meaningful architecture emerges through collaboration between the poetic and the pragmatic. As founder of Farlight Labs, a multidisciplinary design lab, she uses system thinking and speculative frameworks to question possible future. As an educator at SEP, she encourages students to learn conventions, respond contextually, and use visualization to amplify imagination and spatial clarity. Her mentorship has led to award-winning student work recognized by Gujral Awards, SEP Excellence Award, and international platforms. For a decade, she has led Archathayam Designs with acclaimed projects featured widely. As educator at SEP, her approach engages students, and collaborates to unlearn convention, drive contextual relevant design, and use visualization as an amplifier of imagination and spatial coherence. Our third speaker, Neha Panchal, is an architect and academic based in Mumbai. She has an undergraduate degree from KRVI, Mumbai, and a master's in architecture with majors in history, theory, and criticism from SEP University, Ahmedabad. She is associated as a tutor with Rachna Sansayed Academy of Architecture and IES College of Architecture in the undergraduate program. She is interested in conducting research projects and designs that are critically informed by anthropology, sociology, and the ecosystem of the city. Her practice ranges in design, research, and documentation. Our fourth is Mridula Pillai. Architect Mridula is an assistant professor at LSR School of Architecture, Mumbai. She graduated from the Academy of Architecture, Mumbai, and holds an MS Master of Science in Energy Efficient and Sustainable Buildings from Oxford Brookes University, UK. With professional experience in India and UK, she joined LSR in 2008. She is an active involved she is actively involved in teaching design, research, mentoring student, dissertation and competitions, and shaping the school academic culture. She, co- she co-initiated the Insights lecture series, bridging academia and practice. Her research-led inquiry-based pedagogy emphasizes contextual analysis, environmental responses, critical reflection, and religious and rigorous initiative design processes. Last but not the least, we have Apurva Talpade. Apurva is an architect and teacher concerned with questions around the drawing and representation of space, along with the contemporary politics of image. She graduated from KRVIA, Mumbai, and holds a Master's of Visual Arts degree at the Camberwell College of Arts, London. She currently works as an assistant professor at the School of Environment and Architecture, Mumbai, where she helps coordinate the publication cell C Press and research cluster on visual culture. With that, I welcome Aishwarya to please start with her first presentation.
Hi, am I audible? Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me today and for the bio, which I wrote up as a few little checklists that I had to. Yeah. But essentially, what I'm going to be talking about today is kind of reflecting about certain existential questions I've had with myself as an architect, as a pedagogue, in that sense. And today, since the topic has been about the anatomy of a design brief, I always like to break it down and work the other way around. So for me, it's always about the autopsy rather than kind of building up to an assemblage. But to start off with, it's always kind of understanding who am I. And that's something I've still not figured out. I don't think I'll ever figure that out. But then it's also kind of understanding where I situate myself as a person, as a practicing architect, as a researcher, as a historian, as a dancer, as a woman, as a citizen of this nation, so on and so forth. So it's always about kind of understanding where I am or where I come from. Yeah, also to include the fact that there is a regional identity from where I come from, and that sets me apart or sets me off course when I'm in a studio space as well. I'm a Tamilian from South India, and it kind of comes out in the way I speak or in the way I conduct myself, or even so being proud of where I am from. But there is always this kind of big brother that you have to deal with. And there is always this big brother of the nation, of the state, of the government, of the institute, of so many kinds that are always trying to kind of conform you to certain standards and norms. And that's something that I get very uncomfortable with. But I turn that around to kind of benefit the way in which I approach teaching. So for me, it's always about kind of concerning the order, the hierarchy, the hegemony, which is always being lent to me, and how do I kind of look at that or relook at that and challenge it through my practice itself. So, in a world where it just sucks you in, it demands you to conform to certain ideologies, for me, I don't enjoy that space much. I'm uncomfortable about it. And that discomfort is something that becomes very prominent in the way in which I look at myself. But this is not an ontological question that I'm dealing with. I don't kind of break down who I am all the time. I do set certain parameters for myself, and I turn that into an epistemological approach where I'm always constantly trying to understand how do you break down the self, because we wear different skins, we wear different masks, we adapt different voices, we take different stands and standpoints when we are in different contexts, and this becomes important for us as even teachers to realize that, because we have students coming from all over the country, and for us to kind of keep up our ego or creating a barrier around ourselves and knowing who we are doesn't help the teaching world either. So for me, it's always about dismantling this and understanding how do I realize myself, and by that, how do I realize my student's self, right? So there's always this act of the autopsy that I choose, and I try to break things down through conversations, through debates, through just a mere kind of dialogue with the students. And for me, I love and enjoy the morbid space, because this is a space, the autopsy has always been a space which is away from the world of cure and care or remedies. And it's not about fixing, but it's about kind of investigating. And that investigation becomes key to the way in which we start proceeding in our studio spaces as well. So, since I deal with a lot of the first year studios across different subjects, including architecture design, construction, tectonics, visual studies, drawing, I'm pretty much across the timetable. And this allows me to also borrow and tie up a lot of these concerns across different disciplines and spheres into the studio space as well. So our projects really kind of look at how you see yourself. And the investigation is through the body, and the body becoming the first visible cue to that identity that you're trying to kind of constantly formulate. So, how do you then realize that cue, that somebody's projecting to you, and then start dismantling or dissecting that. So in the process, I realized it's not only a dissection of the students' work or their students' thoughts and where they're coming from and their identities. It's about me. It's actually a self-learning, self-reflective process that I have to constantly apply and reapply and then reconfigure myself and reorient myself towards my individual students as well. And I do this through different methods. For me, I always have different mediums through which I work, and I'm very comfortable with the visual medium. I kind of use that as a way of thinking as well. So this is one of the elective projects that I had done and conducted over there, where we were looking at statues across the city and trying to understand larger cultural phenomena that inform the commissioning of these statues, as well as kind of taking a dig against why these statues are even there, because they are as kitschy as they can get, and they are trying to again impose, they are becoming instruments of the state to impose a certain kind of ideology onto their citizens. And how do you then reorient yourself to such ideas? I have censored a lot of it. Yeah, so what you see is something that is probably public friendly, but there are certain images that can be uncomfortable for the public as well, and I'm not shy of talking about it either. So the visual space then lends itself to the space of making. And in the visual studies studio, we really look at objects, of memories, of associations, and the histories of objects through larger cultural identities and larger cultural histories, and try to situate, say, the object within that space. So probably this was last year's project, and we were looking at how we paired students up, and the inquiry was basically to make a container of someone else's object or your partner's object. And for that, you started to have conversations. You had to establish a dialogue with your partner, and that became the softer element through design itself. So we constantly try to choreograph interactions. We try to provoke conversations and try as much as we can to kind of gather as much as we can know about a person to be able to understand how to shape their journey as an architect as well. But this also comes from my teaching of history in the second year. And how do I start looking at, say, diachronic ways of looking at histories, threads of inquiries, which don't define a chronological linear narration of history, but is to kind of position a certain idea and take it through different regions and other histories that will then allow me to question that very form that it exists. And this is something I learned when I'm on site as a historian, and I'm trying to look at buildings from the architectural object onwards and then trying to inquire from there, because many times these buildings are not recorded in archives. They don't have documentation, and all you have is the building. So for me, the building becomes key, the anatomy of the building becomes key, and from there the inquiry starts. So I break down the building, I try to kind of dissect it. This is where the autopsy also comes into use, because you're conducting an autopsy of the building and trying to work backwards. So the idea of the autopsy is constantly shifting for me, whether it is material studies or material cultures to the built objects, or even myself as a teacher. So I see this kind of translating into different ways, and we try as much as we can in a class of 88 students, try to kind of handhold and understand where the student comes from and their capacity of understanding themselves. So there are certain ways in which we look at the body, and may it be like, say, your dominant side of the body, or certain phrases and associations the students feel while they think of the text that we give them, probably for inquiry, or just an obsessive way of making, that you keep obsessively making small parts of your entire model for the entire year, and what you come up with is much larger than yourself, and or even to kind of turn the body inside out. So these are some approaches that we kind of follow, but again, it's not set in stone. It really comes out of engagement with individual ideas and projects. Just to kind of run you through a trajectory of a student, I thought I would take this project up, which was a project we had last year. And this is Labdi's project, where we had sent them to different sites in Bombay. Again, landscape sites, vast, no building in sight, no person in sight either. and all you had was nature around you. And how do you then kind of allow the body to be engaged and encounter with different experiences that you can take back to the studio and work with? So Labdi really was looking at the beach. Danapani Beach was a site. She was looking at how water distorts you, and that distortion also kind of translating into how, if I may borrow what Deleuze and Guattari speaks about the idea of the face, that like the stoic face is the original human face, and any expressions that's added to it is basically an appropriation of culture and a cultural gesture that is then taken onto the face itself. So she really worked with these ideas of the face and facelessness, and the idea of distortion, and she was distorting herself in different ways and mediums that finally then started taking over her entire body, where she started stretching her lips, multiplying her eyes, and multiplying her face and the way she looks at the world around her. And therefore then she saw herself as this distorted being that then emerged from the process of her design. She took back this prosthetic that we assigned to her, and we designed with her to the site, and she had to, like, extend that into her architectural project as well. And that stage we inquired about how do you then, wearing this prosthetic, which is again now an instrument or a tool or a device to relook at site, and how do you then start growing a project from there on? Because again, once it's on the body, it's not complete, it's not a costume that you wear anymore, but it has to become a tool of inquiry further on. So she took it back to Danapani, and she tried to kind of understand the idea of distortion of sounds, what she was experiencing while she wore that entire prosthetic. So she heard muffled sounds of the waves, of people shuffling feet, of her carrying this entire thing around as well, of how people were looking at her and watching her as if she was this creature who's just walking along the beaches. And finally, that kind of translated into her architectural design project. Of course, we do deal with very short time periods, but we make do with as much a slow down process as we can, because we believe that I think an idea has to grow over a period of time and cannot just reach an end stage. The architectural design space does take on a lot of these ideas from the body onwards, and each of these prosthetics then kind of become an inquiry in the drawing space as well. But the drawing is no longer just a two-dimensional form as a representation of something, but it becomes an active tool. So there was, I mean, these students really worked with folding, ripping apart paper, rearranging spaces to see how it kind of changed the way in which we experience spaces in general. So for me, it is basically kind of looking at architecture both in the microscopic as well as the macroscopic lenses, but it is also to convert those lenses into kaleidoscopes and really see different disciplines coming together, and then question what we are doing as architects ourselves. So yeah, that's about it. If that really helped, yeah. Thanks.
Now I'll invite hello, our second speaker, Shikha Parmar.
All right. Um, Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for arranging this, and that this is like such urgent question and such relevant question that we are trying to have a discourse around pedagogy. So I'll start with introducing myself. I am Shikha Parmar. It's really hard for me to bracket myself. I'm an architect. I recently have pivoted myself towards speculative design, an academic, and a very rigorous traveler. So everything pours into each other as learnings and findings and inquiries. So largely whatever I approach, even if it is design, even if it is designing a framework method for a studio as a tutor, starts with some question. So what I'm sharing today is one of the frameworks which really the symposium led me to reflect on or deconstruct or organize what I actually did towards a particular speculative framework studio that I'm doing since recent years. Um, so, like, we have seen things evolving around us. Uh, but the real question, what came to my mind when I was doing certain conventional studios, for example, say a housing studio. So I used to teach housing, and what struck to me or used to agitate me, annoy me as a student myself somewhere also was that why are we not questioning the living? Why our living conditions, our layouts, our way the architecture is expressed, still we are mimicking the way we used to live, say, 80 years from now. So that question stayed with me. And then I was like, okay, then what as a tutor I should bring up as an exercise that it pushes that envelope, and maybe it's not about finding a solution, but maybe asking the right question. So the entire pedagogy revolved around what should be our thinking tools for now and for our future. So the studio that I'm presenting today or deconstructing is called spatial fabulations. Fabulations means to say stories. So here the a student in our unit talks about stories of architecture of spaces in a way where you're not confined by a given brief, but you make your own brief in a way. So the method revolves around having a context narrative and imagining or questioning what if. So having a scenario which is largely about, so we started with climatic catastrophes. So imagining a probable scenario in future, and then having two larger components, one which is very key, which is imagination, which I think whatever the designer would be, it could be product, it could be architect, it could be interior designer, and so on and so forth. One critical ability which I felt, which is very important or crucial, is the ability of imagination. Like, how do you really inculcate as a tutor a ability to imagine, to generate breakthroughs, not just for the sake of it, but because it is relevant. So the two components generally largely which we keep tackling in the studio is imagination, and then how do you communicate. So when I say communication, it's not just communicating to your reviewers, to your clients, to any third person. It is with yourself as a designer, like, because everyone when there is a imagination, where this visualization of certain spaces, imageries, product. So, like, how do you communicate your thoughts with yourself? So that's where it started with this larger two components of imagination and analytical thinking, and to represent that. Largely, the unit, when I look back or through the process, was divided into four components. One is visualizations, speculation over the scenario making or world building, and then conception of the program itself, and designing, and then communicating. So now imagine that the students coming from different backgrounds, because except we have, like, they have an option. So they could be either second year students, so it could be third semester per se to sixth semester. So everyone has a different trajectory. So now bringing everyone to this whole idea of speculation. So we start with this fun exercise, which I call it Inception, where it's like a pun, like you incept, taking some space, you imagine it in a apocalyptic situation, and it's like a 2-day time problem. And you, in a way, it's like a pilot project where the entire studio is now in a nutshell. It's like a summary of sorts, a pilot project. So here you see one of the iteration where like a post-apocalyptic, and the deal is that you have to communicate the atmosphere, the materiality, how will it wear and tear, everything in that imagery. It should be make believe, because if we can make believe on paper, maybe someday we make believe on sites. Again, one of the iterations of the same exercise. So then slowly, when we try to situate situate the scenarios that I was talking about. So then, one goes to the site, brings back the memory, make impression sketches. Then I lay over a scenario. For example, we had a scenario where Ahmedabad had story water, like, so it will fluctuate from so and so meter to so and so meter. So now that I would lay as a scenario for one group versus another group talks about dehydration, for example. Now their responsibility is to make this world and make this situation happen. So the student becomes like a time traveler. That's what I call it. Like, they have to go through the past patterns of, certain situations of flooding happened in other countries, maybe coast, and then how do you bring that situation to Ahmedabad? So they go through data, they go through history, they go through patterns. They literally had to pull out the ocean because otherwise there's no other way in Ahmedabad the flooding would have happened. Once they did, there was a scenario in Jaipur, and then someone realized that there is a Saraswati river which is underground. So, so on and so forth. So we go back to history, pull down facts, find patterns, and engineer this scenario. So which we call world building. The intention to do this, because everything which is designed as an exercise here is with a intent of what are we getting out of it, right? And how it is adding up to the whole idea of designing. So here the whole intention is that a student or any designer does not think of a singular problem and try to solve through one single monument or object, so called as architecture. So it was idea of seeing it as an ecosystem, the entire situation, the entire program, and make that narrative and identify a program in it. So these are the storyboards of engineering a scenario which students go through. This is in Jaipur. This is largely again dehydration. And then what kind of communities happen? Imagine now there is water in a, like, this is talking about dehydration, but imagine there is water in a scenario of Jaipur. Now sandstone will start decaying. Communities will change. The work professions, the way you live would change. Maybe the food changes because now you have a lot of aquatic life and you have less ground to build certain wheat or grow certain wheat. So we talk about communities, question their professions, then say that, okay, what kind of living or what kind of materiality, what kind of technology should emerge if person has to, or this city now has to face this situation for another decade or so. These are some Google Earth imagery that students create. So this is before. So this is current Sarkej Rosa in Ahmedabad, and undergoing dehydration, how it may look like. So really, one, again, pulling back to the idea of communication. So it is not just important, according to me, like, again, as a designer, that you imagine, you have an idea, you have a vision, it's relevant, you've done your analysis, but you communicate rigorously that it's really digested well, and it's precise, it's honest in a way. This is again about rethinking communities, if there is water. So imagine, like, having flooding. So what happens to the vehicles now? You don't need them, so you have a lot of metal scrap, you have a lot of like lot of metal that you can do something else with. So again, as I said, your professions, maybe there will be a lot of tinkerers who would come around and make some objects, crafts, mechanisms out of those scrap. So this is how then they go to the side, morph the side, imagine it in the situation. And so we talk a lot about, we don't talk about building architecture as much as we say that how will it die, how will degrade, how will it age undergoing a certain situation, and then how do you respond to it? Do you adopt to it? Do you do a juxtaposition to it? Do you really have a dialogue with it, or keep it at a distance? You deploy it. What do you do with it? Again, some of the brainstormings, with one of the temples in Jaipur. This is where once they have the design, they start articulating it more, talk about tectonics, talk about how will it stand. So the idea of speculation doesn't mean, I mean, sometimes there is a misinterpretation. It doesn't mean, it's not about the impossible, but it's about what are the possibilities, what are the different possibilities. So this was one iteration where it is on the Queen's Pavilion in Sarkis Rosa. Like one was talking about that if you have a lot of earthquakes, if a city has gone through a lot of earthquakes, there is a lot of debris. So there's this community of scavengers which come around, and they build out of these scavenge elements. And then the idea of non-building comes, that you're not building out of actual artificial or materials as per se, but you're building after out of corpse of old buildings in a way. So it's ever growing, ever changing. It's very customized as per the need and what they are scavenged in a way. Just some instances of, like overpopulation was one of the scenarios. So you see some glimpses of that. Just this was when one imagined reviving a stepwell which is now doesn't have water in a way, and imagining inhabiting old structure which is really right now in ashes in a way. We do a lot of group work, so the entire world building happens as a group in a way. So the whole idea of world building is, as I said, is talking about cohesion. It's talking about cohesive thinking, talking about ecosystem, talking about how an architecture doesn't have to just solve space issue, but maybe it is solving for food, maybe it is solving for a lot of factors at once in a way. And sometimes the proposals may not be even, may not be even like plausible to a certain extent, because we, like, I strongly believe that the younger studios, like, it is more about finding possibilities and again defining a right inquiry for the context. I'll just quickly go through. Yeah, it's okay. So here, we, the student was talking about anxiety, which happens after a lot of tremors, which a city goes through. So then the question really becomes that, do we really still build out of the same materials all over again? Or we literally imagine our architecture out of a material which can be like, say, airbags, for example, that you're not, because building kills people, right? The earthquake doesn't in a way. So we're not like, so it's like pushing the boundaries of even thinking about material construction in a certain way. Also the drawing, there is a lot of push and a lot of rigor which we see in the drawing, not to render it. That's not really the intention. This happens in the last 10 days, but it's more about being honest to whatever you thought in terms of inhabitants. Because the whole studio unit, one underpinning learning that I really looked forward in students of this age was empathizing, like, because you are in an AI world, you're going to have more of it. So one ability that you have is of role play, is of role playing your client, role playing the users. So this situation, which is not familiar, because the familiar people and site you may take for granted. So role playing became a way of, and that's why world building, and that's why, the empathy comes into picture, that now you think in their shoes. You're having water, so there is no sense of ground. Suddenly your terrace becomes the newfound ground. So on and so forth. Yeah, and that's all. I think it will keep going on. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Shika. This is definitely not what many college do in some way, and the imagination of what if. So next, I'd like to invite Neha. Oops, sorry.
Um, Hi, everybody. I'm Neha Panchal. Um, I'm going to present today an overview of the kind of work that we've been able to put together at Academy. I've largely been associated with Academy, and very, very recently, only this year, with IES. So, also, I'm going to present as a part of a team, not an individual, because I think the way we've done briefs has always been a team effort, and so therefore, a lot of thought has gone into a brief as a team. So our briefs have always been uh, sort of highly debated. So I'm going to present the kind of work that we've been able to do in almost a decade's time. Um, okay, so I'll just start. So the brief making has been mostly about experimenting with different methodologies. So, usually our briefs are trying to define a method for approaching design. And usually we try to find different ways in which we would like to equip students with achieving a design. So how do we kind of go about, and every time for every project as tutors we want to try and explore new methods. So we've always thought about how, imagine if every semester students are sort of introduced to a new method. At the end of 10 semesters, they go back with about at least having learned about 8 new methods of how you approach design. So just a very quick sort of um, visuals of one of our projects. This was called a 2 by 2 by 2. It's almost something that we saw today, performative. We kind of took off from Oscar Schlemmer's work, and we looked at the project happened in two large phases. The first phase looked at very disjointed exercises of mapping of of artisans like carpenters, or not necessarily artisans, but people who sort of work, who have repetitive activities and repetitive motions. So say somebody like a carpenter or a raddiwala, or say somebody who makes mattresses, and then studying them, their activities, their just that as an independent study, then understanding the anthropometry of that, doing studies of actions, and then taking it further in. Okay, so this is where the exercise ends, and then we do separate exercises of materials. Again, these are all individual exercises: material exploration, material testing the limits of materials. A series of exercises that separately later on come together in phase 2, where we introduce a design brief. The design brief then becomes an abstraction exercise, where you kind of now carry forward learnings of the previous independent exercises into creating a choreographed space, which is about a 2 by 2 by 2 space, where the space is designed and defined by the team. It's a team exercise, of course. The space is designed and defined by the team. The movements are abstracted into, again, performative movements, by sort of assessing the logic of that movement. And then uh, there are extensions to the body which are created. So this is just a quick excerpt. I'm not going into the detail of it because it's actually too little time to explain the whole project. But this was like a performative project. This was something like a what if, like, a dystopic scenario. But this project, while this was the end was a dystopic scenario, it started off with, again, form exploration, looking at just very intuitive process of making forms, looking at tensile or blobs, or uh, you know very sort of angular edges, creating these forms, then students being paired with students with different forms coming together and paired, and then imagining a scenario where you only have these tools to use to create a space. We looked at J.G. Ballard's Millennium, and we used that as a sort of basis to create a world which has no space. And so imagine when you create, we created the built form like the Nagakin Tower, where you only have that much space to live in, and then you can express a space of release comes as a space outside of your block. And they had to create these blocks. And first, it also involved a lot of negotiations between two students when they formed a team. And then when they started to get positioned in this block, they had to also negotiate with their neighbors, because suddenly they realized that some of the objects that they had created were sort of interfering with their neighbors. So there was a whole series of negotiations. It was a highly iterative project. The slide on the left that shows like a series of models. These are just a few of the many models that each team, the verticals are of each team's sort of explorations of forms. There were, of course, triggers to these forms. Okay, so I want to talk about how design is inherently political. And when we were in retrospect, looking at our own briefs, we realized that our briefs were not neutral, they were always political. Here, when I talk about politics, I refer to the set of choices, which are either explicit or implicit, through which power, value, legitimacy, possibility are distributed. So I'm going to investigate through our own briefs to show the navigation of the different kinds of politics, not sort of restricted, but there could be more. But these are the ones that we kind of realized. There's politics of expectation, labor and time, constraint, language, and information. So when we design our briefs, we basically have three. We break down the process into three. So we ideate as tutors, then we sit and we produce the brief, and then it's about the dissemination of brief. So when I now kind of look at how politics sort of exists in this, the ideation has expectation, labor, and time, and constraint. Production has language and can you hear me? Yeah. Dissemination has information, the politics of information. So when we look at politics of expectation, then it's about who is the brief created for. So as tutors, we are creating the brief, and it's going to be read by students, the jury, and the institute. So when we are designing the brief, when we're sort of formulating the brief, we look at what students would want. So students would seek for clarity, validation, and purpose. Jurors would seek for a conceptual ambition, coherence, studio position. And as an institute, they would be interested in the syllabus adherence, academic seriousness, and measurable outcomes. Usually what happens is we are constantly sort of trying to juggle between these. What we realized was that when we tried to privilege the students, the jurors felt that we were kind of being too soft, because didn't kind of push the students that much. If we privilege the jurors, which we did most of the times, we realized that the students kind of flourished. The projects became extremely exciting. When we privileged the institute, also what we realized was that the project kind of lost its creative push. So this was something that we kind of understood. Okay, then in politics of labor and time, what we realized that the brief would set studio hours. It would demand for iteration rigor, which is the case with most of our projects. There was a shift in labor for us during studio. We had a shift in labor because we used to have architecture design and allied design separate, which became extremely cumbersome for students, and especially post-COVID, with the lesser time, we had more work. So one of the things that we kind of politically sort of navigated was to create a combined studio, which was called the Foundation Studio, which brought aspects of both architecture design and allied design. And that became a way for us to sort of reduce the labor and sort of maximize the time. Also defining individual versus collaborative efforts. Again, that reflects in the kind of labor that students put in. What we realized was that when the brief demands excessive output against time, the studio normalizes extractive architectural labor implicitly. We are not telling students ki itna mehnat karna hai. Of course, we do talk about it, but we kind of expect a lot out of the students. Also, what we realize that that does sometimes set a precedence for unhealthy and exploitative practices academically and professionally. This is all a part of our retrospective kind of understanding. This is one of the studios that was an extremely iterative, extremely labor intensive project where students, while the brief was kind of relatively simpler and straightforward, uh, the process of making involved a lot of iterative work. Students were the design emerged from structural systems, and students had to kind of explore and experiment with structural systems. The models that they made actually were out of at 1:25 scale. So they actually simulated brick or rammed earth or truss, like using sticks to kind of make trusses and using timber as a method. So just a few images. Okay, then I'm talking about politics of constraint. At this point, as tutors, we're kind of taking a very deliberate position of how much of constraint we want to bring out. Although we are talking about design being highly contingent, we are trying to also talk about how much of this. How much of like constraints do we want to give out to the students? I'm still referring to first year because that's been majorly the practice that we've engaged with. So the brief sets simulated parameters that are softer, like the scale, time, programmatic complexity, and drawing conventions, rather than having very real world, like, budgeting, bylaws, services. This is very deliberately done as a team to encourage thinking and ideation rather than compliance. Um, we do kind of sometimes in very sort of subtle ways sort of introduce these parameters as edges, limits, accesses, and neighbors. So that's one of the ways where we kind of explore the constraints. Then there is politics of language. Okay, now politics of language is very interesting. The brief that we always write is in English, and unfortunately, in a very linguistically diverse class, uh, the dense theory sometimes can seem gatekeeping to some students, while poetry or like very, very sort of exciting prose may seem confusion for some. So comprehending the brief is entirely maybe a privilege, it entirely is sometimes a privilege for students. So we feel like, how do you sort of scaffold language of brief with meanings to make it more accessible? So that was something that sort of was a question that I felt required to be sort of looked into. Finally, when we talk about dissemination, it's about the politics of information. So the brief is, we kind of have the briefs presented to the students in two ways. Sometimes we give it all at once, and sometimes we give it in phases or in parts. Now, I feel like the reason why we do it is because we want to control agency on sort of who has the call to take. So when we give the brief all at once, which we've done in few projects, we give the students all the information at once. They have the entire schedule at all at once. They are able to kind of then be in control of how they want to um, put in their effort, how they want to steer their project the way they want to in terms of effort and time. Whereas when we introduce a project one after the other, the bias is, we want to kind of reduce the bias of the student, but also we want to control how much sort of effort goes into every stage. So I feel like the agency then becomes ours. So the idea is to control the trajectory of the project. Just an image of, if you saw the previous briefs, most of those briefs were given as like at the end, but this is a brief which we kind of handed out to the students way in advance. It breaks down every little process. It gives students what is a prerequisite for every week. What are the in-class lectures? What is going to happen online? What kind of research needs to be done, and how are we going to? What are the deliverables at the end? So, very sort of detailed out kind of a brief that is given out to the students. This is just 9 spreads, but there is more in this particular project. So I just want to leave this forum with a few questions. When we talk about expectations, who is the brief serving? So, as tutors, how do we kind of decide who do we want to serve the brief too. In terms of labor and time, what kind of work culture is being normalized through our briefs? Constraints, what is prioritized and what is postponed? In terms of language, who is feeling included and who is feeling excluded? And in terms of information, are we doing a power over or are we doing a power to? So with that, I'd like to end my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Neha, for bringing out what really goes, behind of making a brief. And yeah, students, please read the brief. Yeah. Yes. With that, I'd like to call up Mridula. Can you please?
Hi, very good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here. A couple of disclaimers in the beginning. Uh, there's a lot of there's a little bit of text on the slides because I was croaking quite a lot yesterday. I'm very happy I'm able to speak today. So that was to compensate for that. Um, so just a little bit as to how I arrived here. After graduating from academy, then completing my master's, working a little bit there, working a little bit here, and I came back with this feeling of being highly empowered, because you've got a different kind of knowledge, and telling me that okay, I can maybe design a sustainable building. It was a feeling of being extremely empowered. And then because of the situation in which I came back, and because there was an economic shift at that time, and I got drawn into teaching very unexpectedly. And it was while I was in teaching that I suddenly began to question myself as to do I really know who I am or what I am or what I'm supposed to be doing, because I began to be seeing what I had learned, but from the other side of the table, and somewhere felt that I had the freedom to question it because I was at the other side of the table. Sorry, the font seems to have moved itself around. But the question that came to my head first was, what is the role of an architect? Who am I? What am I? What am I supposed to be doing? And if I'm in a classroom with a set of students in front of me, then how do I explain to them what that role of an architect is? Right? So if I'm part of a design studio, that obviously is coming through a design brief. And in that design brief, what I saw was being done was that a problem was being defined, functional requirements were being specified, and there was an expectation of a built solution, right? Basically, a form that was enveloping a functional space. So that was what I saw was happening. And what I realized is that there was no scope for questioning, that we were only giving them a projected outcome. And why are we only thinking of an outcome? Shouldn't, as an architect, when I'm in the world outside, I am supposed to be part of the process of questioning whether I'm even supposed to be there at all, right? So we're not training students to be part of the process was something that was hitting at that time. And again, very, very sorry, but everything seems to have moved around, right? So, is questioning the role of an architect in a given premise even part of what we teach? Was what I began to ask myself. And how are we structuring everything around this? Why are we giving them a single paper that tells them, okay, this is your site, this is the area, and these are the things that you need to design, and this is what the area of each of those things that you need to design are. So that's where I began to really think through whether we need to do this at all. And to be very frank, I'm still in that stage I'm still iterating and questioning and rethinking even what I've done last year or the year before that, to see whether it can change and give a little more of a inclusivity to the students in this entire thinking process. So what came from there was that, do we teach our students to design buildings, or do we teach them to identify an opportunity for impact, or to even question whether at all is there an opportunity to impact that space or that problem as an architect? Maybe there's somebody else who can play a better role there, and we need to be able to understand that and step back where required, or include another person where required. So that's the space that I came from. It's been 17 years into this questioning, and I'm still in the process of cross questioning what I questioned earlier. So um, what came from there was that over the past few years, we've looked, at least I've looked at, trying to incorporate a set of things within the brief that we are trying to formulate. And I have been teaching the third year extensively, which is semester 5 and 6, over the last decade or so. And I came down to a set of uh, 3 points that I could keep working with in different scenarios, that we could keep thinking through in different scenarios, and giving more agency to the students and allowing them to think through the design program. So one of them included inspiring discovery. And we tried very hard in different ways to do this. And we kept coming up with roadblocks of different kinds, where we felt that, like one of my other co-speakers also mentioned, that you're very rooted in the current, and you don't question what is happening currently to think of a different future. So the idea was to disengage them, or to decouple them from where they are right now. And we've tried various ways of doing this over the years, sometimes to even shock them into a different kind of a reality. And there are times where we take them into a current space and ask them to rethink it. But again, at a third year level, then there are other compliances that we have to deal with, in terms of the university syllabus, in terms of the fact that they have to eventually give a university viva, and they have to have a certain set of requirements for that. So there are all these things also that we deal with, but we try to include a lot of this as part of our studio. The second part is allowing freedom in defining or framing the problem. So we get them to immerse themselves into a scenario, and get them to learn to ask the right kind of questions, because I think being able to frame the right kind of questions is half the battle won. So begin to engage with the people in that space. Begin to understand that even though you come up from a certain point of expertise, you might be able to call yourself an expert citizen, but the people living there are the citizen experts best in a way that nobody else understands. And it's for us to understand how they do what they do, and to be able to intervene in a mid space where, we are not telling them that what you're doing is wrong. We are learning from them and giving them what they need, kind of a situation. And so that's what encourage design thinking in response to the problem that has been framed. And then the last bit, of course, is something that is very close to me, but there's always a place where, I have to let go of it, which is permit flexibility in the deliverables. But again, that now, because of the year that I teach in, becomes a big problem, because there is a set that they have to submit at the end. But in the beginning, in the way that they analyze, in the way that they understand, in the way that they immerse themselves into the design problem, we permit a lot of flexibility in that space. Um, so I've put down a set of programs here. I've not been very good at collecting images over the years, so I'm just going to talk about it. Just a second, I'm just going to take a sip of. Going back very far back, when I probably started thinking as to what I wanted to do different, and why we wanted to do it different. And Rashmi here was part of the team at that time. And we decided to go to Kerala, and we did a hands-on earth, mud, and bamboo workshop for 5 days. And we hadn't really created a brief at that time. We didn't know what we wanted them to design. We wanted to go there and see how they respond to what they were doing, and then see what we could come up with there. And we picked a site on the Willingdon Island at that time, and we went there and we sat there with the class and looked at what could come up as a program on that particular site. And of course, we had to somewhere put in an aspect of, yes, it has to have a certain level of complexity. You have to be able to tackle a certain number of situations. So that's where we came in as teachers. But a lot of it was what they wanted to do, because they were so taken aback by the fact that they could create things with mud and earth, and a lot of them were probably touching it for the first time, and they were so happy with what they were doing that eventually what the brief turned into was basically an ode to nature. That as architects, if we were to create an ode to nature where people were able to come in and learn to build different or design different, what would that space be? And those were things, design elements that they themselves came up with. And we were very happy that I'm really sorry about the presentation, it's completely moved around, but we were very happy with the fact that they were able to come up with what they wanted to create on that site. Apart from that, when we asked them to start describing how they would set out, what they would set out to build and how they would set out to build it, a lot of them started doing it in a method of storytelling, that from a first person perspective, that I'm standing here, and then when I walk in, and this is what I want to do, or this is what I want to see, or this is what I want the people to see. And that's how they narrated their entire walkthrough from start to end. So even their eventual design program, even though it had the stipulated set of drawings, started and ended with storytelling, where they were walking through the entire program from the point of view of a person, of what they wanted to see, why they wanted to see it, and how they felt it would impact a person walking through that site. What I'm talking about here is very different from what has been spoken, because of the disparity in the years, I think, that we are dealing with. But the second project that we took, very complex name to it, but it was basically a study of the Worli Kolivada. And it's a site that has always fascinated us through the years. We've taken it up multiple times, where we really enjoy just setting them loose in that setting, because again, it shocks them into a different kind of reality. It's not something that a lot of them are used to seeing or coming from. Even though they've come from the city, they're visiting for the first time, they have no idea what they're going to be part of. And when you let them loose and you let them explore for 3-4 weeks at a time, what they come back with is quite shocking, because they see things in ways that you never expected them to see it, right? So, like for example, there are two spine roads in the Worli Kolivada, and one of them ends very abruptly. And this one student, his way of saying that it ended abruptly was that, ma'am, jo gas wale ka cart tha, he came, he stopped it there, and he had to carry the cylinder on his shoulder there onwards, and he followed him through. So the entire thing has been spoken about in terms of narrowing of the lanes, from the point of view of the fact of how the gas wala had to adjust his cylinder on the shoulder to walk through those lanes. And seeing how students respond to a completely different environment and notice things in a very different way is something that propels us to do it again and again and again. um, Again, they were given complete freedom to create a brief, right? We gave them very broad requirements, and they were able to design and create what they want, what they felt the community needed at that time. We had to step in a little bit again, just to ensure a certain level of complexity, but practically every student in the class had a completely different design program that they had evolved from what they were looking at on site. Uh, okay, moving forward. Uh, this was when we were stuck at home, and the pandemic had hit us, and that was the one year that I got shifted to the second year. And we really didn't know how to take it forward. We were speaking to a set of students that we hadn't interacted much before with, and but we were speaking to them as dots online. Right, that's the most I could describe at that time. And the word that came to us at that time was hope, because of the kind of situations that they were in and the way they were describing that somebody had to walk, a couple of kilometers to even access that network on his phone, and that kind of a situation. The word that came to us was hope. We couldn't define a site, the students could not visit a site. That was the situation we were all in. So we told them to design something that represented hope for them, to come up with what is hope for you in the setting that you are in. Where are you located? What do your people need? What would they see as hope in a time like this? So again, 80 different solutions to 80 different scenarios that they were facing at their end, going through whatever they were doing at that time. Now that went forward into again the next semester, being a university semester. Sorry, I'm speaking again from the point of view of compliances, but that really does govern a lot of what we have to churn out as an output, and it does restrict a lot as well. So they did have to have some kind of a program. There was absolutely no scope of a physical analysis because they were online, they were at home. There was only that much we could do. So we came up with 9 very bizarre locations that we were as new to as they were. Okay, so it's not that we knew any more than they did. And we jumped into an online session of research with them as to what are these places, what's so unique about them, right? What do they do there? Why do they do what they do? What kind of a, what is the setting that it is located in? And from there, we went to something that as students, they would all be familiar with, which was a learning space. So how would you construct a learning space for this community that you have managed to read through about online? So like I said, we were as much at a disadvantage as they were because we knew as little or more about that community as they did. And we wanted to be at the same level as they were, which is why we did what we did. And it was interesting to know that students are extremely capable of gathering information online, of doing something of it from what they understand. And because there was nothing real to that problem, because it was so, it was completely imagined. The site was imagined. The place was, something that they had never visited, that their teachers had never visited, that, they would tell us what they knew, and we we were okay to believe what they told us as well. They came up with a very diverse set of designs that responded more to what they thought the people were. Again, it comes into another realm of fiction altogether, but in the situation that we were, that was the most that we could give them, that little window of looking outside of where they were. That's what we looked at it as. And and the fact that we were online, there were no specified deliverables. They just had to be able to showcase what they thought of design to us through whatever medium they felt was comfortable. But it had to be online because that's where we were. This was the last semester program, um, where we wanted to give them um, a community and an occupation as a basis. But we wanted to relook at how we allowed them to study that community and how we allowed them to look at that occupation. So we gave them a lens. And the lens that we gave them was Labyrinths by Louis Borges. And it was an extremely intense book. We tried to get them to read it. Then we had to give them excerpts from the book, and we had to go into understanding and analyzing what they understood from it. And then we decided, why not go into a more of a of imagery instead of looking at just the text. So we let them loose in the city of Mumbai. We said, okay, these are the allegories that we are looking at. We looked at knowledge, memory, time, identity, and cosmos. And we let them loose in the city of Mumbai. And we said, go find your metaphors to these allegories first in the city. You come up with your interpretation. It doesn't matter what it is. We are not judging you as right and wrong, because there is no right and wrong to it. But we're just adding to an understanding of how far that metaphor can reach. Beyond that, then we actually took them to Sassoon-Dock. Then again, that site functioned as that the shock setting, where they were shocked into another scenario altogether, completely disengaged them from what they are generally used to. And we got them to study and understand Sassoon docks and the community and the artisanal fishing aspect of the docks through the lens of the allegories, and looked at how they could present it to us, and then went on to, so this was some of their presentations that they looked at. And then through that, we got them to work in pairs and create a design program around the two basics, that is the community and the fishing industry, the artisanal fishing industry, and then look at where it would lead them in combination with the allegories that we had given them. So, like I said, we are still in a process of rethinking what we had done and why we had done and where it could have gone and how it could have gotten better. And we've already done part of it in the 6th semester studio. We've looked at Indore as a project, and looking at the Sarafa Bazaar and its extents and where it could go from there. And it's going to be a continuous process, I think, for all of us at the semester 5-6 studio, and how we take it from there. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Mridula.
Thanks, Tushar. And I also, thank you to all of you, Mridula and Neha and Shikha and Aishwarya. I just wanted to say that, this has been a while coming, the Teacher Symposium. It's something that we've been wanting to include in this series of events that we do annually. It's called the C Annual Week. But it's really a pleasure to be able to speak with, very, very people who think very seriously about teaching as a practice, contemporary teachers, about the nature of our work itself. And I teach primarily in the first year. There are a lot of core questions that we contend with. But I also wanted to say that, all the teachers at C, they bring their questions and they bring their research into the pedagogy. And all teachers have courses that align with their questions, that align with their interests in spatial thinking. And so, given this diversity, you'll have teachers who are anchoring different courses all throughout the 4 years, and then in the 5th year you have all of the teachers who then come together to take courses on thesis and architectural research. How do you frame architectural research? And then later on you go on and do your design dissertation. So I wanted to speak primarily through one of the modules that we conduct here, which is called form and experience, and I'll try to connect it to the larger arc of what the student trajectory at C is like. But what I felt this symposium is really trying to do is to look at pedagogical practices and orientations that have sharpened themselves, and speak through courses that have a spatial thinking that is relevant and new, which is embedded within it, and also to, like I said, bring together this collective. So we've been doing this course at C for many, many, many years now. I think even since before I've been teaching here, and it has changed and shifted throughout the years. I think it's been happening since the very, very first year of C itself. And it's consolidated right now into, this very meticulous and very considered, and it has this very structured form. And this is the wager that it makes, essentially. So it's structured around this proposition that space is working as an enveloping phenomenon, and that it is able to produce or mobilize a sensory response that is situated and felt first in the body. And this is the brief of the course. It is one which is without a site, it doesn't have a program, and it also doesn't have an object. And this is specifically of relevance, because you generally understand architecture through the object. And like a lot of courses, I mean, you're not able to deal with it as having, like the what the practitioner actually works with is the nature of space itself. So how do you really get a student to engage with the nature of space, with space being the material and not the object of architecture being the material that you work with? And along with space, or like rather attached to space, you also have the corresponding materials of body and memory and behavior. And this is to say, and I'm just reiterating the premise, is that bodies and behaviors, they're continuously acting within and upon space and producing it, and reciprocally space also goes on to produce or generate and influence behavior and experience for the body. So this is what the design brief for us is at the outset. Um, I, I'm also not going to speak so much through the content of the course, but rather through its pedagogical structure. And at the outset, like the presentation is going to be pretty much the opposite of what Mridula's has been, because it's very sparse. I want to discuss, the conceptual core and the ambition of the module. So it's like, it's less of a project presentation and it's more about making pedagogy into this argument. So because it's called form and experience, and because it has to do with how spatial experience is produced, then the pedagogy really has to be about the mechanics of experience. And this is what we've tried to break down, and this is what like how do you break down the mechanics of how experience happens in space as a pedagogical program. Whoops, little, yeah. Okay. Okay, so what we start off with is a literary text. So now the text serves as a catalyst to think and to launch into acts of form making, to launch into acts of translation. But the text is also its own work. It exists on its own terms. It has its own autonomy, and you have to treat it as such. So the text will generally have mythical or scientific elements embedded in them. So we use a lot of science fiction. We use J.G. Ballard. We've also used Borges. We've also used Ursula K. Le Guin. Um, and like the idea is that you spend a lot of time with the text, and sometimes with corollaries of text as well, and you build a familiarity with that. And so usually the texts that we use are these excerpts from longer stories, or they might be passages that might be spatially charged. We've often used poetry, we've often used the surreal. Once in the orientation course, we were looking at the landscape of dreams, because this is congruent with what these passages are trying to do. This year with the form and experience course, we also, we didn't start with the text itself, but we looked at scientific concepts and then how are they generally scripted and how are they generally read. But also this time the shift was in reading them and understanding them as phenomena, as experience. And there's a specificity to why you do this, why you work with the surreal, why you work with the absurd, why you work with dreams, why you work with charged descriptions. And it's because it's by themselves, okay, these readings generally are unfamiliar terrain. So they are spatially charged, they are sensorially charged. There is an immediate imagery that also comes along with this high symbolism. The characters that they suggest and they bring up are incongruent, they're often absurd. And it requires a close reading, and that is, part of the course where you sit with this small piece of text, whether it's this poem by Rimbaud, whether it's, like a Breton poem, or whether it's this excerpt. So you discuss it closely and you discuss it for its suggestions, you discuss it for its politics. And that familiarity actually takes you several readings to establish. And the other thing is that and then that leads you to the act of translation, because, and this is again something that is very delicate and difficult, because as Aishwarya said also, it's about locating the, like, this act of translation is about turning what that text suggests onto yourself. And it's about locating yourself in these works. So you find an anchor in these texts and you make use of it as this tool for translation. So you turn what is the experience of the poem into, eventually the spatial experience, and that active translation, like, you're interrogating and you're using your memories, you're using your objects, you're using your own associations, the history of your own associations, the weight of your own associations. You build these metaphors as bridges between text, and you turn them into these provocations that eventually you have to work with material, scale, etc. And the way in which you're able to do that, the way in which, like, that first act of translating in the text is actually held in the drawing. And later on we work with this method of writing as well, but drawing and writing, writing and drawing, and then drawing and drawing and drawing, essentially. So it's basically working with the drawing. And I'm sorry, I'll get to that. So I'm basically going to be speaking through how we structure it, and then the slides, I'm hoping, will be this very Berger-like essay where you just go through them, and I don't necessarily want to speak through the slides, but rather have them on their own terms as visuals that we can just take you through one by one. So and the question of drawing is something that is fundamental to pedagogy. So all of the courses that we do over here have one, like how do you orient yourself to this new form of drawing, or what is the new form of drawing which is grappling with the question of space? That is something that is at the heart of all courses. But what we're doing in the first year course itself is that, and maybe we can come back to the question of drawing a little bit later. But this drawing then is about this translation, but it also doesn't become about a representation, but it becomes the new side of experience. And so the drawing then becomes this essential act that is taking something about the nature of space and what this new space could be. And part of this course is also then, where the drawings then take over the entire school there. And this is basically to talk about the, the scale with which you make these works. They're generally these massive drawings that then get pinned up, and then they, on their own, because you're working so large, they also become this new terrain, this new landscape that you have to contend with, and these new forms, these new ideas about space and inhabitation are emerging from how you look at drawing, how you construct the drawing. And the next thing that we do is you look at how text becomes a response. So, and again, I'm giving you this, what Neha was calling this stage-wise information about the brief rather than telling you what the brief doesn't hold. But this is how the brief is constructed, where you have, when you're concerned with the mechanics of experience, you first talk about a form of work that can launch you into an act of translation. And this form of work is usually a text which has this sensorial charge to it, or it has an absurdity to it. And then you translate that through drawing, and you bring the weight of your own memories and yourself, and you produce the drawing as this new site. And then from there, in order to inhabit that drawing, what you do is you work with the text. And we call it a text and we call it a script. But what it essentially is this very experimental form of writing that can, reinsert the body or the self or the new being into the space of the drawing. So then, you encounter the drawing, you inhabit the drawing, you negotiate this new terrain. And this in itself, it'll take many forms. So when we're talking about the experimental form of drawing, when we're talking about script writing, sometimes these work as endless lists that you make. Sometimes they work as, the idea of the log, and how does the reading of the log become a form of writing that is very analytical and suggests a certain detachedness. Or it works as, this soliloquy that you can, where you, encountering the space, launch into something, or it is simply this thick description. Or sometimes they also work as, like, along with thick descriptions, you also have glancing descriptions or oblique descriptions. And what we're trying to say here is that, the text is not serving as something to illustrate, okay? And it's not something which is, you're not working with either or. You're not working with the image as subservient to text or the text as subservient to image. But each of these are works and stages that exist on their own terms and become means to inhabit and to distort and to restage in a sense. So, it becomes this very crucial stage in deconstructing experience, and then, recomposing it spatially. So these were some of, like, again, excerpts that we worked with, where on the right you have the poems of Atharimbao, and on the left you have some excerpts of student responses to what that text was. And at the, so this has been the process so far. Again, like, you work with these acts of translation, and now in order to restage this encounter, in order to move into that act of space making, the center of this course is essentially about the consideration and the implementation of theater as a pedagogical method. And the claim that you make here is that, theater is not this output in the course. It becomes a method through which spatial experience then gets tested, it gets edited, it gets refined. So, and you think about, like, what the drawing is allowing you to do. You think, like, the drawing is allowing you to set up the new site of experience. The text is allowing you to stage an inhabitation of a certain kind. You're able to slow down experience, you're able to dissect it into movements, you're able to look at it as fragments. It still maintains this visceral distance between body and space. And the way in which you engage with it viscerally is through the act of theater. So it becomes this means by which, you bring the body back into the center of spatial thinking. And what we also wanted to speak about is also that, the body is not this abstract idea of the body, and it's also not the standardized idea of the body. So the body, again, in this whole remaking, in this rereading, if you worked with Borges and, you work with a book like the Book of Imaginary Beings, then the whole exercise becomes about imagining the being, encountering the being, and seeing the body as this new being entirely. So this body is this new thing which is elastic, and it is exaggerated, and it's extended through devices. A lot of the students this time worked with, instruments, and how do those instruments then become these extensions to the body, and how does the body then transform its behavior that way. So they become these costumes and these prosthetics, or they become, these objects that you're continuously making, or they become these things, these interventions in space that you set up where you transform something familiar around it. And this is because, like, the normative architectural body, or the normative, when you work with assumptions about the body, you're also working with assumptions about scale and behavior and acceptable ways of occupying space. And then again, you come to the questions of the politics of the body in space as well. And performance, we feel, is, it allows these assumptions to be destabilized a lot. So you have this process where, then the students then get grouped together, and scripts are made to encounter each other, or drawings are made to encounter each other, and you respond to these texts, you respond to these imagined characters. And then what emerges is not something that is necessarily or actually ever pre-authored. It's not, and it's not even a singular narrative. It is more this sort of spatial field, which is made up of, like, these multiple encounters. And sometimes there is friction between these characters that encounter each other. You have these new bodies, you have new forms, you have new fields. And this space, this new body and this new space is the one that is really testing what experience then becomes. So how, by really looking at how the new body might need to perform in a space, you really look at like how experience is constructed for the new body itself. And that is when you're able to hold on to the sense of how your body itself internalizes experience and how space contributes to it. And then what does a transformation in space do to what you already know about this? And the performance doesn't get confined. I mean, we'll come to the, I'll talk about the performance again as well. But so once you worked with the scripts and you're working with the encounters, and then the whole process then gets staged. So the design method is essentially this whole act of encountering each other, and encountering each other through the new body and through these edits and these spatial alterations that you are making. The only way in which you're actually able to make it happen is through the act of rehearsal. So rehearsal is, again, like, and because all of us, and I feel like all teachers of architecture speak about the iterative process and how that is such an important part of design thinking, design working, design making, is this whole, and this is something that we've been speaking about a lot at C as well. This, where you call the iterative process, this practice of the Riyazi practice, where you bring something and you work on it and you test it and then you transform it, and each of these iterations that you make, each of the versions that you then have, grow and grow and grow. And rehearsal actually, like, works in the same way. So over here, the riyaz, or the iteration, is about this constant editing that happens when these bodies, when these spaces, when these rhythms, when these movements, they start editing themselves as in how they come together. So it's not like the script will get revised in the process of the rehearsal as well, and then the device will get tested in the space of the rehearsal, and the interventions get adjusted. And it's basically, which is this, the rehearsal provides the space for this feedback, which is then going to alter your device, alter your body, test your experience. And as we said, the performance does not then get confined to a stage, in a sense, because if you're talking about the idea that spatial experience is transforming, it gets cited across the entirety of the school. So you're weaving together, like, you'll see they work with extensions to the landscape of the school, and you'll extend columns, and then you'll build from balcony edges, and you work with thresholds, and you work with sounds, and you work with the existing sounds and the landscape of sounds that are already there. And you produce space through these proximities, through these interruptions. And then and then the audience then becomes this one moment. So it's not necessarily even performed for an audience, but the audience becomes a moment that then passes through this entire process of the rehearsal. And I'll just And because this is, this foundational year, and because again, we wanted to talk about space being the material that you contend with. One of the things that we also deliberately wanted to move away from is thinking of, space as a container, whether you're dealing with form or whether you're dealing with environments. And specifically because, this container idea of space is generally something which is very benign. You see it as a stable geometry, or you see it as a backdrop to life and lived practices. Whereas with the course like this, I mean, the whole idea is that space doesn't happen like that. It's produced through action, and then and then architecture doesn't just become material. Architecture also becomes an event. And we also wanted to say that spatial meaning then is something that is, it's imagined, and it's not something that is pre-authored. So it's essentially pushing for, this non-object centric architectural pedagogy. And I wanted to also speak of it as, thinking about it as an academic inquiry, because you're treating the iteration itself as inquiry, and the body, and this performing body then becomes this instrument of producing knowledge. And in that sense, the course is not simply about producing performance. It's also about producing positions on form and space and body. And then teaching is becoming a way of constructing knowledge through this form of structured experience. So where you don't see, this is in opposition to seeing teaching as a um, as delivery, where you have, if you see it as content which is delivered, and then the students will produce the work, and then this gets, you have a review which will evaluate the outcomes of the course. But this is more about, seeing the studio space as the space of the laboratory, and the classroom is this site of experimentation itself, and then this process itself is the one that is, producing knowledge. And then this brief then becomes, it becomes this designed environment to realize the hypothesis that you bring. So if you as a pedagogical practitioner want to test something, then the classroom then becomes the space in which you realize, or you prove, or I mean, you test this hypothesis in the space of the classroom. And this is something that, so if your concerns are about the nature of space, or about the role of the drawing, or something like, how would you really bring that into the space of the classroom? And it's something that is really anchored in the trajectory at sea. So there is this emphasis that each semester takes up a core question, something that is very, very fundamental to spatial thinking in its core courses, but also obviously, in the whole ecosystem, which is the culture and built form studies, and all the lecture courses, all of them tie up to this fundamental spatial question. And, if form and its relationship to experience is something that you explore in the first semester or the second semester, you have different questions that are taken up by other semesters as well. So, for example, in the third semester, you have, your genealogy, or you have the question of how, our understanding of certain kinds of built forms, or certain institutional ideas of built forms, how have they emerged, how have they evolved, and speculatively, what could they become? And a lot of these questions then, and located differently, become the anchors that students take forward in their thesis questions as well. So the thesis question is not necessarily like the range of inquiry. It ranges from the idea of space as phenomenon, space as embodied experience, to different concerns that might be relating to the role of institutions or environment, etc. You really see that settle in the way in which students have internalized these courses. So yeah, that's
Thank you, Purva. Uh, this is the kind of conversation that's opening up on, like just how intensive this idea of brief making with such responsibility and awareness of from where students are coming from, and making a brief. It's just not about just thinking about, okay, what a design would be. We're not trying to, let's say, curate to only a particular set of people or student alone, like what Neha just showed us. It's the academics, the other faculties, maybe even the university and the jury. So far beyond uh, just catering for the students, but what do students learn from it? Yeah. And with Ashwarya's talk about the autopsy as a method of the critique itself, and just exploring yourself as you work around with the students, and you are asking these questions again and again with the students in the class. Yeah, and with even Midula's constant questions over the years. Yeah, so I would like to pose this question first, that the riyas of brief making, the iterations that the brief is subjected to. It may be student comments, it may be, let's say, the university's course suddenly changes, maybe the jurors come in. So how does this, you know, or involving other teammates or in the act of brief making, the other academicians, because we alone don't make a brief. It's a collective thinking. So does this iteration has shaped and the brief in such a way? How is it evolved? Yeah. And how often do you think that the brief should change, or the brief should, at least run for, maybe even if you get a negative feedback, should you at least try it out for, 2 more semesters? Yeah. So I'd like to pose this question to Neha and Mridula. Uh,
Thanks, Tushar. Um, yes, so I think in terms of how often do we kind of like uh, rethink our brief. So first of all, like I said, our brief is usually formed. I mean, the whole entire team sort of debates on the sort of larger objective of that particular studio, and uh, because now we do first year design as a foundation studio, there are a series of things that we want to explore. So uh, sometimes the projects are broken down into smaller projects, and so then we try and think about what are the larger learnings that the students need to have in semester one. How do we kind of explore the idea of space in semester one and then in semester two? So there is definitely a lot of debate that goes on, and because we have a team that sort of continues, it's been a team that's continued over the years. We also are sort of reflecting on projects that we have taken up in the past. We are kind of contemplating on feedback that we have received from students, from the jurors, also from our other colleagues from senior batches, to kind of see competence, to see understanding of how students, what is the understanding of the students with respect to space. So keeping that in mind, we kind of do sort of iterate on our brief. Also, let's say we draw up a larger framework, we usually keep space for contingencies, because as we sort of begin a project, there are a lot of factors that tend to take the project in different directions. And so we also keep that little freedom to how, the project is going to move. Especially, like I said, when we give the project in stages, then at that time we usually have a lot more freedom to kind of steer the project in the direction that the students have, we see the students sort of taking it in. But when we do have a slightly more tighter brief, which we also experiment with most of the times, um, we try to sort of stick to it, but it's usually it usually kind of depends on the outcome of every stage for the process. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah. So we get students after they have completed the first and second year of architecture. So they've already been through a certain level of teaching, and part of what the team does as a process is to look back at what they had done in the last 2 years. Now, the question of the outcome, the desired set of learnings stays the same every year, but the way those learnings are achieved changes every year. So we go back to see how they have managed to achieve the set of learnings that was stipulated for the first or the second year. And if we feel that there is something that maybe has been missed out or something that needs to be reiterated or enhanced on, then that's how we begin the process of creating the brief, the set of ideas of what we want them to get to achieve through semesters 5 and 6 stay pretty much constant, but how we want them to achieve it is what changes, and it changes every single year. We have not repeated uh, a brief in the last 10 odd years that
I mean, it
we've been
was
teaching.
very interesting in your brief that there was no brief at all. It was, you just simply introduce student to a particular context, and the brief churned and evolved.
And it
So,
evolved, yes.
yeah,
So that has happened in some years. In some years where we're looking at a site and we feel it's overwhelming, and we feel that the set of responses might be too diverse, then we set some kind of some kind of boundaries where we feel that they need to fall within that, and then they can explore themselves. But the brief making process itself for us takes around 6 to 7 weeks. So that's where the bulk of the process of the iterative process is in the students being able to question and create and respond to what they have seen. Yeah, I hope I've somewhere answered.
yeah. Thank you, thank you. I would like to pose another, whole table that are we faculties, teacher, spatial practitioners? You know, we often are spatial practitioners. Like we often in our profession think that faculties or the teachers tend to be in a theoretical world, and whereas the practice are the spatial practitioners. But uh, as a collective effort with the teachers, students in the studio as a space, and are we also spatial, because we are concerned with the contemporary questions of the space. So it is very important to realize that the studio, it's not just a demonstration of what a building could be, but what it is, what it is, and even what if, like Shikha was pointing out in her brief. So maybe it's situated in some other time, in some other relevant, like the engineer of the scenario. Yeah. So are we special practitioners uh, in the studio with the students, collectively thinking about space, working of space, and producing space in that way? So if anybody were to respond to it.
I'm going to take this. So I think, yes, space is the key question in, I think, our practice as well. And what we also try to do is we're actually formulating a critical author, right? Who recognizes that space also exists within you, exists around you. You're a part of space and you move through space. It is a space where you exist, right? So, as a teacher, we are also performers. We are also performers. We're not mere spectators or to students' performance or to a student's progress. We are ourselves performers. So a lot of times in the studio space, you do see us kind of interacting very physically, like to show or to kind of like also edit certain formal ideas, which are quite which demand a lot of us to involve our bodies within that space as well. So I think, yeah, space is central to all of our questions. But in the first year, especially, we need to be able to realize that we begin presenting ourselves through our body first, and that is the starting point of inquiry of space itself. So
I I don't totally second this idea of space being the center, or we being spatial providers or thinkers about space only, because as a tutor also, and eventually even a student as a designer, I think a, a pedagogy may just lend up a student a mindset, a design approach, a toolkit to solve anything. That is what I believe. And processes can do that very deeper, and like literally an ability to tackle anything. And then spaces, maybe being a part of a department or a discipline, can become a vehicle or a medium, is what I feel. But the processes that we are really trying to, such deep inquiries we are laying, curating, I think it may not have to answer just spatial deliverables, is what I, come from. It could be mindset, it could be a toolkit to solve anything. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's it's about how you're framing the question of practice itself, So, and there's a course that is conducted here, which is called Contemporary Practices in Architecture, which is what the 10th semester students do, where it looks as the whole idea of, the expanded idea of practice to begin with. So you have architectural practices that are artistic, architectural practices that are, research oriented, etc. There's a lecture series that we're doing right now, which is looking at architectural practice as engaged in writing or in, with an environmental turn, with many, many, many different turns. So if you think of the practitioner as someone who is engaged critically with, questions about space, then this is again, if you're thinking of practice again and pedagogy as a practice which produces knowledge, then I feel like that question sort of becomes about that then.
And yeah, in a way, let's say I'm trying to ask that whether we consider, like we really in the studio, really questioning the realities and so forth. It is the act of space making, not more than just a trial of of an attempt of what's outside, but in the studio we're actually constantly rigorously thinking about making space, and or maybe even not as a spatial tool in that way. uh, I think to all three of you, Shikha, Shreya, and Apurva, I think the approach of the body, like in Aishwarya, like beautiful exercises of thinking the body is not just the silhouette as we often do in our architecture studio, but you're almost looking to the dissections of the body itself. And I remember in Shikha's studio that well, we were also teaching together in SEB some point, where the performance, the engineered scenarios that you present to the student imbibed them, the characters were designed, and then there were also the act of performance that they would imagine, and the students in some way engross into this making of this, similar to what Apurva just showed about the theater, the text, and the drawing out. So how Apurva also questioned that the space is the material, you know, and let's say the brief of the anatomy of the design brief, and if design studio holds the heart of all the institution itself, and if we begin this, there's always this the central theme to the brief, that it starts from text, or it starts from, let's say, imagining of some other world. It starts from maybe cutting the body up, or maybe it starts from a specific critique that it comes in, or it starts from students' experience of a particular space. Uh, how does this academic practice today, yeah, uh, sits in your reflection right now? Yeah, how let's say the act of body and performance of space move beyond this. So the more clear a bit more. So the body, like we begin, always the first years as the study of the body, the self, the body, yeah, and how does this understanding the body shape uh, the classroom? You also mentioned the politics of the studio in itself, where the text or the different backgrounds that the student come from, how does that affect or has an effect on the brief in any way, yeah, and see that can we situate the body as the center theme of understanding it, yeah, and design seems to be a response to the certain brief that's it's set up, like is it a engineering scenario or a particular text, or is it the inside of the body itself? uh,
I can try to take this. So it's a very complex and very important question as well. Like, like there is always a projection of self in whatever one does in a way. Um, but um, again, the ability as a designer, if we try to question, is maybe start referring from the self. So self becomes the reference, but the role play becomes the performance. And that's, I think, the ability that one needs to achieve over a period of time is to play and empathize, to stimulate what you're trying to do, for what you're trying to make for, or for whom, that role play. So but because of everyone having their own value system and also evolving their own value system in a way in this process, starts from the projection of self as a reference. As I said, it's relative, so it starts from this projection of self, and then how far it goes from the self to the person or the community or the context you're making for. So I think self becomes just a, or the embodiment becomes just a reference.
Can I try? So we had done this one studio, very interesting. It was called uh, Tashrif Rakhiye. And again, it was about the idea of the body. And it was basically creating objects of unrest. And students in teams had to they were given parameters of the bum and one more part of the body that they needed to support. And they created full scale. They had to look at how you can support, and they were given a way to support the body and give you only comfort for uh, 60 seconds. And after 60 seconds, you should feel a sense of discomfort and get up. So I feel like that, and there was a lot of questions about, like, why would you design a brief like that? But one of the interesting aspects that we realized, because for all of us, we are always looking at spaces of comfort. And then what does this idea of discomfort allow you to understand? And I feel like it gave us it gave as tutors, for students to have an insight on what it means to be inclusive, what it means to have people who don't feel comfortable, where we're not always looking at a spectrum of everybody who's able-bodied, but who have different challenges. And I felt like there were conversations after the studio with students, which kind of revolved around looking at bodies which require different ways of comfort and what happens with discomfort. So I felt like there was a sort of a position that as tutors also we took in for a project like that. So I think uh, it kind of gave students a way to sort of question what it means to be uh, in an unrest and not necessarily rest.
Right. Thank you, everyone. With that, I would like to open up to the audience for questions. Go ahead.
Hello. Uh, Thanks for offering glimpses into your inquiries. Um, it's been a treat to see all of them. Um, my question is for everybody on the panel. I would love to hear your thoughts, everybody's thoughts on. Um, and it's this. I mean, Aishwarya's question, "Who am I?" Uh, places the. I mean, generates the concurrent question, "What drives me?" By the way, there is a movie, Jackie Chan's movie, "Who Am I?" Faced with memory loss, Jackie Chan is goes into an existential crisis because he can't decide whom he should align with, the good people or the bad people, and then the whole movie kind of follows that. Um, so my question is this. Rather than treating this as an existential question, can you place this question of what drives me or what you all are doing into slightly longer institutional histories of the institutions where you all are teaching, um, or where you might have taught earlier, or where you've studied? You know, I mean, for instance, and maybe everybody's frame of reference might be different. Mine is from 1995 when I started studying, but also seeing other works in my school and also learning from my teachers about how they were framing things in trying to move beyond the fermentation that was taking place in the decade before that. So I leave that open to you all, but underlying it is, what debate are you engaging with? What are your interventions into the debate? If there is, if you're invoking newness, difference, or rethinking as y'all are invoking, um, what are the interventions into the debate? Is it extending older forms of inquiry? Is there something new happening here? What are the shifts in the methods, both of the inquiry process, but also of pedagogical transaction? Like some of you all were focused on your process within the studios or the courses that you all were teaching. Others were focused on the pedagogical transaction. So yeah, I mean, so that's broadly my question. I mean, I'm asking this to um, to essentially open out what we might learn on a teachers forum by thinking about this question together. I mean, I can make it more specific to each one of you. Some of you opened up the uh, some of you opened up the idea of the body as both a site of inquiry and a site of fabulation. Others opened up the site, space as a site for fabulation and inquiry. I mean, so body, in the ways in which you all opened up the body, is a site of performance, gesture. It is also a physical form. It's also a social being, and this generates inquiries into experience, geometries, forms, volumes, material practices, so on and so forth. What debates are you all intervening into? Is there a debate that comes before, from where you all are learning? How are you all taking it forward? For Shikha, I mean, the question of, I mean, how does fabulation get situated in the apocalypse narratives or the crisis narratives? Is there a history to that, and is there an exploration that is new? What kinds of debates about the apocalypse do you find yourself in? Or for Neha, I mean, your emphasis on the pedagogical transaction. Where does your emphasis on a particular kind of pedagogical transaction where you are trying to democratize the learning process, and that the stance towards democratization is a particular kind of stance than probably what Apurva spoke about. And these are two different kinds of democratization that are being opened up. So what kinds of debates are you all situated in? And that also extends to Mridula, because that's the fabulation of the architect's role that is kind of being explored.
Um, so I'll try to answer this. I'm not exactly sure if I'm getting it, but so uh, I graduated from Kamla Raheja and I started teaching at academy. The way uh, you know the pedagogy was very different, and then I of course did my master's from CEPT. So I feel like uh, a lot of different ways of learning and different ways of teaching sort of helped us sort of formulate our briefs. Also, our team is also like an eclectic mix of people coming from different backgrounds. So everybody sort of came with a whole lot of different ways of teaching. Um, while we were teaching at academy has a certain trajectory of how they teach there. So initially there was, we had to ease ourselves into the way we kind of brought about, or rather the way we kind of formulated our briefs. So I feel like there was lesser agency to the students. We if you actually, so that's what happened when we were kind of reviewing the briefs. One of the things that we realized was that we were privileging the institute, our briefs were privileging the institute a lot more initially, uh, and less to the student or the juror. And then I think as our principal started to see the kind of output, see the kind of, once there was more trust in the kind of work that was being churned out, the kind of ideology, the kind of thoughts that were being put in, and the kind of questions that we were asking and the students were asking, it gave more agency. It allowed for more flexibility, allowed for more agency to be given um, to the tutors to develop briefs where even students had agency. So, where briefs, there was a lot of involvement of students in the formation of programs, very similar to the way Mridula spoke about. And we were doing it at first year level, where we were not giving them, I mean, there were projects where we were not giving them uh, briefs I mean, the entire program, but there was a method that was developed, and then programs got charted out in conversation with students. So there was a much more democratic process in that. Also, a lot got developed. Students were also exposed to many aspects, like when we would do projects about body, what is the body in a space, and very similar to what Apurva said, how space is created by the way the body moves, how the way the body occupies a certain space. And we also we allowed for space, sorry, we engaged with theater workshops. I mean, students got exposed to that. So I think a lot of interdisciplinary engagements allowed us to develop our briefs over time. So I think our studios have sort of grown in many aspects. So if I kind of look at the different parameters that I spoke of in terms of the politics of the brief, I feel like all of them have existed in every brief. It's just that, like, it's like how you increase the level of certain aspects as you kind of go along the 10 plus years of sort of practice that we've had in terms of pedagogy.
Hi, Rohit. I'm a student of Academy of Architecture. I was a student of the Academy of Architecture, and apart from the first year Allied Design Studio, which I think Neera ma'am was a part of at that time, there was no process of exploration. So, it's coming from what Neha saw when I think she joined there as a teacher. But it was more about, you need to get this done. This is what you need to do. This is where you need to do it. And when I joined teaching at LSR in 2008, a lot of the teachers from academy had shifted to LSR. So I was teaching at times with the people that I had learned with. And the questions that arose as a student surfaced again as a teacher. But I at least had the agency at that time to ask as to why are we doing this? Why do we need to get them to do this? Why can't they also explore a little more? Why don't we see a little more through their eyes and change what we want to look at as well? So that's probably where it began from, and that's probably where it's led us down. And we're still in the process of looking and re-looking at how we want to take this into a more structured format. And I'm being very frank here that we are at that stage where we are trying to give it structure, and at the same time we're also averse to giving it too much structure that keeps us within that frame at all times. We don't want to do that. So also it's they like you have a set method of thinking here, right? But it's not the same in all institutes. So at each studio, we look at a studio independently in most cases. And also in a way, I'm okay to do that, because at least there's a certain set of freedom. And I have teachers here who have taught with us in the past and have been part of this entire process. So Dushyant was with us at some point in time. Rashmi was with us, and they've all been part of this collaborative process where students are given the agency to also respond to the site in the way that they see fit. And we step in as guides where we say that, okay, maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but how far do you need to go? So that's where we are at right now, and we are seeing how much more we can frame this. That's the debate that we are at, basically.
Thank you so much for asking this provocative question. It really made me again reflect, go back. When I feel still I'm a student of CEPT, though. I mean, so so the school of thoughts which have been engraved is, I feel somewhere it's first principles thinking. So now also if we dial back, okay, what was the context then when I was studying, for example? So the briefs were very defined. They were defined in terms of where, for whom, what. I'm being very objective because the briefs were very objective and very definite. Um, because the value system was more about okay, let me was about learning from masters. It was also because there were a number of them. There was understand the pace of projects that which took time. So the pace was different of practice, and that's why the academia and in a way before back then of like following and learning certain methods, certain number of methods was fine, and that gave us value system to do and practice in the same way maybe. But now we are in a age, or what we will come more and will see more and more, we are already in a age of over simulation, over choices, over exposure. So my question or reflection as a tutor came from a place of saying, okay, there should be a constant of first principles thinking, but there has to be a evolution of pedagogy in terms of not just democracy of or giving flexibility. I think that's still, we are touching the surface. We're really not going deep down to the real reason in a way. It's more about now it's important more than ever to have a value system, a design value system, which helps student not just to design per se, but to make decisions about design or anything that they do. And that's why moving away from the familiar is like, it's like putting it in an extreme, so that one has to tend towards first principles thinking. So this is what I showed today was one of the studios. The other speculative studio that I do is literally fictional, mythological, novel-based architecture, which means one has to think like a snake sometimes. So what then first principle question, if I put an instance to, is like really questioning, do you really need a staircase? If you're slithering, do you really need? So suddenly all the standards are useless, and you really go back to the first principles. So that's why it's the intention was to generate the first principles thinking at max, in that degree. And that's always a debate of how much, as per the time comes, and the tools, technology, and the practice diversity, as we already discussed, is on our table. Yeah.
Hi, Rohit, to just answer your question, yeah, I've been a student of Kamala Reja, and my training has also been quite similar to what Apurva had presented today. So, a lot of how we saw ourselves, our space, and it was a very democratic space for us to also perform and to also realize who we are. But I think with the changing climate, the political climate out there, I think there are a lot of concerns that we have to also address very specifically in the studio, because now from a batch, we were the first batch of 80, and we were all from mostly Bombay, except given few students who had come from outside Bombay. But now I think the tables have turned as well. And you have like a 50-50 ratio where people are from mostly outside Bombay, as well as like, they struggle to come into the city. And it's an unfamiliar terrain altogether. But that unfamiliarity is also an advantage, because the studio is actually an abstract space. It is not defined by its rules and regulations. We really can set these rules and regulations of experimentation to make students also realize, and not stick to where they come from, but to kind of understand that probably they have a new identity that they can really take on, and that new identity will then place them in the world out there and allow them to, like, practice from there on. So I think the main questions that we deal with are kind of questioning dominant representations, and this is happening more and more today in the studio space, in the configuration of students as well as the faculty. And that's something that we have to also be very careful about, but at the same time continue to kind of be a little bit more uncomfortable in speaking about these things within the classroom space. So it also includes, like, aspects of access, touch, intimacy, gender, your past histories and traumas and experiences, along with your associations and cultural practices that you bring into the studio to then, like, set against another, to be able to understand where you come from and then what you can borrow and assimilate within your process of becoming this architect. So yeah.
Thanks, Rohit. I've been teaching here for, about 7 years now, so I'll just speak from there itself. And, one of the fundamental things, obviously, in the first year that you deal with is um, assumptions that you have about many, many, many things. And if you start with assumptions about space, say, and the nature of space itself, then, like, for example, if you were to talk about, like, images. So you have, you ask a student to draw the house which exists as one particular image, which is in, like, marked difference to the house where you actually might live, which is also, like, it's a different image. If you're talking about the currency of images over here, it might be different from, like, the house where you, or the inhabitation where you might want to, where you desire to live. And intervening over here, or intervening across all of these, is essentially, intervening in the question of the self itself. And this is done in many, many ways. So you obviously, you have a course which is about historicizing the institutions that prop up this whole idea of the self, and, dismantling it in order to generate an empathy for the other. But also, like, my interests are also in about, like, how do these images produce desires and aspirations, and also the question of, like, how does the idea of a visual vocabulary or a visual lexicon then you increase, like, what your references are when you think about like space, but also in extension, self and body and behavior. And then, like then the shift or the cultural shift that you want to produce or that you're looking towards is actually about that shift in visual culture, which is brought about through drawing, but also through about that whole sense of this new expanded visual vocabulary that builds you up and sets you up, that produces this whole different reserve from which you launch into thinking about self and body and making and space and all of that.
So we'll have one more question, two more questions. All right. Yeah, and we'll break for lunch. Good.
Hello. Yeah, I think my question is more of a continuation of this discussion. I teach with Neha. We've been a part of the same team. And whatever she presented in terms of how our briefs have grown, have questioned certain things, we've had this one aspect of briefs that has always, been there staring at us in our face. That is, how much freedom can we afford ourselves as teachers, as an institute, to move away from very real life pragmatic architecture versus the way we approach that architecture in academics, in terms of intellectualizing it, in terms of theorizing it, in terms of um, going down to this very basic level of the self. uh, you know, we have had these very, like, rigorous to the point of having arguments during our brief formations where we've, questioned, are we going like, are we moving far beyond the sort of realm of architecture and space where we are getting into these different things? And like, how far can we go? I think it's a very relevant question. That's exactly a lot of us struggle many times as teachers, that how much freedom can we afford ourselves, how far can we move away. I understand mediums and inquiries and ways of seeing, but do we really in any way address what is out there for our students when they step out in the real world? Are we addressing that in any way when we sort of go down to this basic level of seeing self, or the self? Or are we able to eventually move on from the self to sort of equipping them to become an architect that can also address what's out there? And it's almost like a monster waiting for them, and then they'll come back to us and tell ki what we saw in college is very different from what happens in the real world. So I think, yeah, my question is that, like, where do we position ourselves as institutes and teachers? Like, we would like to know what other institutes do, because this is one place where we argue a lot as a team. So, yeah.
It's a very important and crucial question, and I have answered this many times in different paraphrasing, but yeah, similar question. I think one can go as radical and as extreme, is my belief. Again, it's very individual, as possible as a tutor or as a student or as a designer. Um, Having said that, the fundamental grounding or that intent, if that is clear, one can go as radical as it could be. That what are we trying to achieve out of it? Because there is an umbrella to it. Because I believe I'm one of the tutors. I am one of the studio units, or this is one of the methods. And there is a landscape of studios or design pedagogies and methodologies. Like we are instancing one here, right here, like with different mindset, school of thoughts, and processes. So I think that is the benefit of doubt, that I give myself and go as radical, and I still feel I'm being very shy in exploring what I really want to explore. Trying to negotiate all the discipline deliverables, this and that, but really, because again, if the intent is clear, and if there is an umbrella of an institution where there are other journeys that a student will take and explore, and then for themselves they will decide. Again, because in 5 years or 3 years, they can't learn everything. They learn is someone from the table itself mentioned about that the learning processes, different ways to tackle, ways or methods to tackle also. So yeah, that's the benefit of doubt, that like I give myself, because you're in a spectrum or a pool, and I feel not the practically or pragmatic is not that not important, but maybe if what is the practicality and pragmatic, first of all, and what is real and what is practice. I think these are very important question to talk about in today's time, where we are saying, when we were talking about body behavior embodiment, and reality, I feel virtual is as real these days. And then what is the kind of experience, and how do you experience, how do you role play that? That's an entire another panel required for that. But I think that's what we need to fundamentally question also parallelly. Yeah, that's
Maybe we'll have one more question from Rupali.
Yeah,
Yeah. So Anuj and
yeah. My thoughts are not very well formed, so no. I was only thinking constantly throughout this conversation. Whenever we read uh, discussions or any things that people in our context speak in architecture, they never mention their teachers. You know, the only instance I remember legit is Charles Correa very explicitly says that, I owe my thing to my teachers, Georgie Kepish and Buckminster Fuller, who have been fundamental in the way. And you can actually see that in his work, in his very analytical, mathematical, typological way, or even urbanistic approach of thinking. And I was thinking that which teacher should I think of, like, and why is it so that none of us in our context, we recall them as gurus. Oh, he gave me this thing, lesson of life, and Ashirwad diya, but we don't recall them as people who really taught us to think the world. And even if probably we have internalized it, we are not able to recognize or acknowledge these people. In what tools have they given us that I think like this because this person made me do this and make me do like this. And in that spirit, I was hoping that something from this pedagogy this discussion will unfold, that what is it that we are trying to lend to our students, that apart from all the politics and everything which will have its own politics, will the students take forever with their life in their lives. And in that spirit, then I mean, we can keep on saying that we want the students to discover and we have freedom and this thing. Yes, every person will think that, but it's not universal. So in that sense, I was wondering that, do we really hesitate to have an agenda for our briefs? And I'm asking this question in the sense of, how do we, in our own life and our understanding of the self, which is of course shifting, articulate the role of an architect in the society? Are we so scared that we don't want to materialize it or lend it to our students? Because we are just escaping from this, that, oh, I mean, let them discover, let them do. Why then? And then I was arriving at this question, that should we just not teach what we are good at? Because in my experience, I've always went far away from my actual core thing when I actually start teaching that. So is that the hesitation from where uh, personally I'm saying? So so do like then what? Then we are left to teach some generalities of, skill. A skill in the sense of very hard skills of drawing, drafting, model making. बाकी वो देख लेंगे, कर लेंगे. So are we hesitating to have an agenda, clear agenda for our course? For example, like Kepish or Fuller, who were teaching full time at and were like really like, this is what I believe in, this is what should happen, and that's fine. If you want, if you have a counter argument, let's have your position. So yeah, what are these positions we are building, and through that, can we have our students really acknowledge us in some way. That's self.
I think, I'm probably going to be the last person. So, uh, what I would like to make suggestions, because I think this is a great forum to have, because we don't really see this kind of, it's really like the anatomy of the brief. The students are here together. And also, I think to kind of extend Rohit's long question, because he located the question within your institutional histories and where you come from, but also extending it a little bit within the larger discipline of architecture. Where do you locate your own questions within contemporary architectural discourse? Because we're not starting from scratch. We're located within a larger history. Of course, there are, Kepler and the Fugler have long modernist histories. There are particular things that they could say what they said because they were located in a contemporary modernist society at some time and could be so sure of themselves, but we're located in a completely different contemporary. So where are your, how do you locate your questions within that contemporary, and then where are those tools coming from, like really kind of specifically working out that. And I can see that all of these have specific questions, but I would really kind of encourage you to push those questions further, to locate them into real specificities and larger questions, but also tools from there. And I'm also then thinking of, the fact that perhaps we need, and we at C we've been starting to think of an academic journal, where we bring in some of these questions, where we are also able to have, often, you're looking at a brief that you're producing together and there are arguments, but can there be a peer discussion like we're having here, very, very honest peer discussion that really kind of looks at the anatomy of the brief, gives feedback, and, locates it within a larger history of architectural discourse, also locating it within what we understand by reality, also opening up what is that reality. So I think I really, there are no questions here, but I really feel that kind of this process requires a little more rigor in locating ourselves and sort of following this up much more rigorously. And also, students you'll need to be involved in this, because it's important that you're not just at the receiving end of it, but you are as much thinkers, co-thinkers of this process, which is why we keep saying we require your maturity, we require your maturity, and I can see that. You can see the maturity of the students when you involve them in these questions, So I think that that's where we need to go to really kind of take this to a kind of place where we ask questions. I'm just also little bit of a detour to, looking at your questions of fabulation. Currently, your questions of fabulation are located in a climate apocalypse, right? But that's also where the contemporary is located right now, So, what is the politics of that apocalypse? I'm thinking of, the what's her name? Sultana's Dream, you know, like Sultana's Dream was a fabulation. It was a feminist, story written when, 105 years ago now, which was a fabulation, which was really kind of looking at another world, Dinah Hayden asking what should a non-sexist city be like, and since, are those other kinds of fabulations. I like the word world making. I think that's something that probably ties everybody together. What is this world making that we are kind of building? So I think sort of locating each of those questions in what is the world making, what is the politics, where are we located in the contemporary, and then what are the specific tools that you're producing to contend with this. I think that's something that we will be really useful for us to bring down on and make very, very precise. And that's why I would really kind of suggest making this kind of journal where we're able to ask those questions, more precisely.
I'll take 1 minute. I'm just kind of, the reality question. No, I think uh, I think the idea of real and reality has been hijacked substantially by the industry and market. I think academy is a place to rescue it. And I think it is hijacked through the profession. And the thing is, the profession, or the Hindi term is more vulgar, vyavhar or vyavarik. I think that hijack is something we should be kind of careful about, because ultimately what are we teaching? We're teaching body and redrawing and rethinking. So I think these are fundamental things which are necessary for any architects, nevertheless. Otherwise, in the name of reality, you teach what is industry. So that's the thing. Second point is, again, going back to Korea. I mean, he spoke of Caprice and Fuller, but he also spoke of Ekalavya and Scheherazade, and much more rigorously, and wrote so much about Ekalavya and Scheherazade. And I think there's a clue there as whom he would consider his teachers. Somebody who, I mean, these are both fictitious figures, but also they're also they're also pushing you to self-learn and learn through non-clear linear systems of doing things. And I think all of you all have been kind of struggling with that fictitious, being absent teachers, as well as figuring out a non-linear way of thinking and doing, because I think otherwise there is a risk of it getting hijacked by the industry and the market, because the industry and market requires that without a linear thinking there is no industry possible, right? But the whole thing of architecture is that it cannot be. It requires the body. There are so many dimensions to it. I think that those struggles are very kind of evident in this entire, and then they come up as beautiful drawings and all kinds of renderings and stuff like that. I think it's a good point.
Great. Anyone wants to respond to Anuj's question?
Because I feel more sometimes, like, at least I would be able to say for myself, like, more radical things are, I'm more my intent and my deliverables are more clear, because I feel where you want a lot of, you want to be a little more arbitrary, or you want to break or push the envelope. I think your grounding, your methodology, your deliverables, everything has to be more rigorous and more crisp and crystal clear. So there is an intent and there is a clear cut outcome and there is commitment to that. But I understand where you're coming from, like, like the whole idea, the question that why the students today don't remember that what they, I think maybe they do. It's just the communication doesn't happen, or the feedback loop doesn't happen.
Yeah, just like I know that there are three teachers over here who speak specifically about the first year. So I know that this whole idea of the self and everything seems very heavy maybe in this presentation. But it's just that, the interrogation of the self is not really about the self so much as it is about, like, recognizing the other. And it's about, like, generating this sort of sensitivity and criticality, like the criticality towards the self, and the way in which you deconstruct it is essentially about building that empathy towards things that are not the self. And so that's why it's so foundational, and that's why like that becomes the core for this kind of thinking. But it's not that it's what I wanted to say is that it's not that it's inward looking in any sense. It's, in fact, it's the opposite.
Thank you. Any students or any comments on YouTube? Any students anymore?
Just to answer your question about practicality. So what Prasad said, I agree that there is no real or reality which we can define right now. But in CE, we did one project in mass inhabitation. So what you meant as practical, which is the industrial practical realm, we tried to overlap the academics and the practical there. So we were doing construction workers housing in Ahmedabad. So for that we went to Ahmedabad, we studied all things, and then it was a project which was going to turn practical, which was going to get built by the students, and mentors. So in the whole process, we were just trying to balance the practical and the academics, like the research core. Like, how do we not turn industrial or just make if because we were working for construction workers, we had very financial constraints, but the core was to just retain that sensitivity which we are taught in C. And to Anuj's thing, to how Korea talks about Kepler and Fuller, I think we in C, at least for me, we have very clear agendas as a school which we will follow, because I don't think many seniors I talk to, they talk about specific faculties. Of course, we know the C members know, but we talk about C. C taught us this. C taught us that. So I guess in future when we talk, we won't say Anush taught me this, Rupali taught me this, but we'll say C taught us this, because yeah.
Also, just one on if that journal ever happens in reality, I would love that if the cover page can start with what is the definition of architecture. Because, like, I work with a lot of artists, other designers, visual designers, graphic designers. They more or less seem to have a unanimous agreement on what the base profession is. Versus every time I go to a different architectural conference, context of what they're referring to as architecture only changes so drastically from industry to space to body. Like, it feels very disjunct. I mean, I don't see that as a pro as well, because it makes more pro. I go by Prasad's definition of craftsman of space. Like, that for me is sacrosanct. But it doesn't feel that it's unanimous across the field.
Okay, those are comments and first respondent. But I think it was really nice to have you all here today. And for the first time, this teachers symposium puts together this new ideas from different colleges, from different institute, different school of thoughts, and just sharing each other's work, not as a final product, but as a process of brief making itself. And I thank you all, to the speakers and to the audience. And we'll break for lunch. And after lunch, the students will be presenting their work. Yeah, an idea for it. Thank you.